Good morning, everyone. So I know it's a cliche, and you've heard me, if you've been to a CEP conference before, say it 100 times, that foundations play a unique role in our society, and an important role, a role that other actors can't or won't. And for that reason, your effectiveness matters. And you've probably also heard me say that everything it takes to be effective sounds like what it takes to be effective in anything. You need clear goals. You need coherent strategies. You need disciplined implementation. You need relevant performance indicators. But on every dimension, it's actually way harder than it sounds. So how do you choose goals when there are so many interdependent, pressing problems? Do you give locally out of a sense of commitment to your local community, or do you give globally where arguably your dollar might do more good? How do you devise and implement strategy when strategy can't be yours alone or it won't work? How do you implement when your implementation is dependent on so many relationships? How do you assess performance when there's no easy metric, no analog to ROI, no universal measure? So effectiveness is difficult and complicated. It already was. And then on November 8th, and then on January 20th, for some of you anyway, it felt like it got a lot more complicated. What does it mean for your effectiveness, this new context? What does it mean for your ability to make progress toward your goals? What does it even mean for what your goals should be in the first place? Obviously, there are no easy answers, and there's a lot, I get that there's a lot of emotion. I had some, personally, some feelings about the election. I imagine you did as well. But whether your emotion is despair or elation or something in between, the question still remains, what are you going to do? How are you going to operate your foundations effectively in this new context? Some say everything's changed and foundations need to change. No more business as usual. So Pam David from Walter and Elise Haas Fund wrote a piece in the Chronicle. You may have seen it. Pretty compelling. The Trump administration appears set on degrading or dismantling many of the pillars of the federal system on which we have depended and with which philanthropy is accustomed to working. We are called by these times to engage in different and new ways, even if it causes us discomfort, Pam said. But not everyone feels that way. We surveyed CEOs about the context post-election, and I'm about to talk to you about that. And we got this note from one. It is too soon to know, and I think surveying at this point in time is overly reactionary and antithetical to the best of philanthropy, which should be thoughtful and take the long view. So curious. Did you send out this kind of a survey every time we have had a change in administration? That's a fair question. And the answer is no, we didn't, because it felt different. The change context felt more dramatic. And so we wanted to know, and that's where we're going to start today, how are foundations operating in this change context? And this is going to work. We're going to have an interactive plenary with 400 people. So we're going to talk about the change context. I'm going to share some data, and then you're going to talk about it at tables. Then we're going to talk about some research we did on the future of foundation philanthropy, how foundation leaders see the future. The Hewlett Foundation commissioned this research on the occasion of its 50th anniversary. We released it at the end of last year. And then we're going to talk, of course, where are you? You're at CEP, about the foundation grantee relationship. All right, so let me start with this change context. We just analyzed new survey data. We had the survey in the field very recently, and we went ahead and conducted the survey because we got so many questions from foundation leaders. What's going on? What are others doing? What do you know? I think folks are trying to align their work with others, trying to reflect on their own decisions and choices, and they wanted an understanding of what's going on. So it's a snapshot in time. And we also wanted to understand, where are foundations? Are they heeding Pam's advice and really rethinking along many dimensions the way they're operating? Or are they more like the person who sent us that note? So let's turn to the data. We fielded the survey February 21 to March 10th. $5 million in grant-making or more was the cutoff. Private and community foundations, 34% response rate, pretty typical for us, and particularly in a tight time frame, not bad. Representative of the survey population. The responses were representative of the survey population on dimensions like foundation type, region, and so on. And we saw, although I can't guarantee that it's representative of different perspectives on the political context, we did see a wide range of responses. So, for example, this foundation leader sees opportunity in a Trump administration. We're interested in accountability across all sectors in U.S. education, and we see opportunities to deepen the conversation around accountability in private school choice or voucher programs, that person wrote. Somebody else took the opposite view. We care about many issues that were under attack during the presidential campaign and now are under assault by the new administration and Congress. Some saw a mix of opportunity and challenge. This CEO wrote, "The only potential positive opportunities are in rumored infrastructure investments, possibly creating employment opportunities for unemployed adults. Beyond that, all the expected changes are negative in terms of impacts on low-income people." And then some did say, "Look, folks, it's too soon to tell. I feel we're in a state of flux," said this CEO, "due to the administration's lack of time in office. It may take several months before we can see the opportunities and challenges." So we heard all those perspectives, but some were more frequent than others. So let's look at the data and what did we see. So we asked a simple question: what is the effect of the change of administrations on your foundation's ability to achieve its programmatic goals? 3% said generally positive effect. 48% said generally negative effect. 24% mix of positive and negative. 8% no effect. So think about where you are as I walk through this data on these various dimensions. So, and then another 17% said not sure, it's too soon to tell. But are foundations shifting fundamentally? Like literally, are they changing their goals, what they're trying to achieve? So we asked that question, and we saw that indeed 28% said they're modifying at least some of their programmatic goals. 45% said they're not. 27% said they're not sure or it's too soon to tell. And I think if you're reading the bulletins that come in over email and paying attention, you see that that folks are announcing changes with some frequency. I've seen a couple just in the last week. When people talk about change in programmatic goals, they're saying things like, "We're modifying to respond to the changed context for immigrant and refugee issues," or "We're exploring adding or developing programs in media, journalism, knowledge, and data." I noticed Barr Foundation just made an announcement last week, Barr here in Boston, that they're going to launch an initiative to support frontline organizations working with vulnerable communities, and then also one to strengthen and sustain journalism in the United States. So fundamental shifts even in what are the goals that are being pursued. What about changes in strategy? Here we saw about a third, a little bit over a third, said they're modifying at least some of their programmatic strategies. Another third said they're not. And another third said they're not sure or it's too soon to tell. One CEO said, our foundation may need to focus on making progress more at the state level than the national level. And we'll come back to this because this was a big theme in what we heard. And also, we may need to plan for more defense with less expectation of opportunity for big progress. So those are big changes, right, to change your goals and strategies. Democracy Fund, for example, in terms of strategic change, just announced commitments of more than $12 million to support a robust free press. And what about changing allocations? So we wanted to know, are people increasing their grant-making budgets, changing their budgets? And 35% are making some kind of change in their grant-making budget, whether to increase it or change allocations. And then another 38% said they're not, and 27% said they're not sure or it's too soon to tell. What was striking to us is when we asked a series of questions about change in practice, that the overwhelming majority, 2/3, were placing more emphasis on something. So they were doing something differently. So let's look at what they're doing differently. Collaborating with other funders was the most frequent response. Also, advocacy and public policy at the state level, as I mentioned, and at the local level. Convening grantees, seeking input from foundations grantees, movement building. These are the areas where foundations are saying we're placing more emphasis post-Trump. I think it's interesting to look at these in collaborating, convening grantees, seeking input, movement building, even the ones that have lower proportions there. There's a sense that foundations are seeking to connect and hear from and work with key partners. For community foundations, which are in all these survey responses, key partners also includes donors, and we asked some separate questions for community foundations, and what we saw is that almost half are doing more donor outreach or more donor events and education. So I hope this is helpful in just giving you sort of the lay of the land in terms of where people are in this moment before I ask you to think about where you are. But maybe the most interesting thing to us was the responses to the open-ended questions we asked in this short survey. We asked folks to write about the challenges they see and the opportunities they see. Now, some people skip one or both of those questions and just answered the ones that are quicker to fill out. But 53% wrote about challenges, and to our surprise, 50% wrote about opportunities. Now, some who wrote about opportunities said, look, there's alignment on the education or infrastructure agenda between the Trump administration and what we're doing. But those were not the most frequent responses. The most frequent responses were those who saw opportunity amid challenge, opportunity in the mobilization of resistance to the agenda of the Trump administration. So this was sort of a typical response in that vein. As I see it, the opportunity lies less in anything the administration is planning than in the counter-narrative and counter-movements it is sparking. This administration, this CEO wrote, is a disaster for essentially every aspect of our agenda, but the very egregiousness of its behavior is laying the basis for a new social movement. Our focus needs to be on how to leverage that. So foundation responses to the changed political climate obviously vary. Foundations are not a monolith. But almost half think progress toward their goals will become more difficult, and most of our respondents are changing something in reaction. Most are changing something.